I'm Ava Bennett, 31, Army National Guard, Disaster Response. Today is my wedding day, and 3 empty rows sit on my side like a verdict. The chapel is small and high-shouldered, pine in the rafters, winter pressing its face to the glass. Cold lifts the veil at my neck. Candles tremble as if they know something I refuse to name. The guests hum, polite curiosity. The same hush I hear before a briefing, when the map shows red and the budget shows less. It has been a year of smoke maps and sandbag lines. The Guard keeps hopping state lines for floods and fires, while the news chews on shutdown chatter and pay delays like it is weather. I have slept on gym floors and church basements and learned that cots and vows both live or die on logistics. I steady my breath the way I do before a helicopter lift. Count in 4s, taste the metal cold. Then the doors open, and my father steps in with 2 officers, snow melting in constellations on his coat. He carries the stiff calm people save for funerals and favors. My chest tightens the way it did during the last wildfire, when the wind changed without warning. He meets my eyes for half a second, and I recognize that look, the one that says he has already chosen a story, and I am not the hero in it. Somewhere beneath the organ and the murmurs, something old and cracked shifts. The kind of fracture you pretend is healed until weight finds it. The officiant coughed, a soft, nervous sound. My father stepped toward the altar, the officers flanking him like bodyguards. He didn't look at my fiancée, Harper Lane, only at me. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat. One officer held up a thin, legal document. I looked past my father to the open chapel doors, taking inventory. The silence was deep. I took one steadying breath, counting in 4s, and slid the wedding band off my finger, placing it carefully on the velvet cushion before the ring bearer. "Not here," I said, my voice cutting through the hush. "We will not make a scene here. You will wait for me outside, or we can do this at the station. Your choice." I turned to the officiant. "I apologize. We will pause the ceremony." That was the first boundary I set in front of witnesses. It felt like a small, clean act of demolition. I walked past them, toward the back of the chapel, and through the doors. The cold air hit my face. He followed, the officers close behind. Why would my own family bring cops to my wedding, and how far back does this start to count? 4 years earlier, the sky over Boulder tasted like a dirty coin. Wind shoved fire downhill in ragged sheets, and the hillside spoke in pops and groans. My radio crackled against my collar while ash glued itself to my teeth. We had minutes, not hours. The shed behind our house coughed smoke, and the dry grass around it flashed from brown to orange. My father Thomas moved on muscle memory, jaw tight, eyes already counting risks. He pointed toward the shed, where his old ambulance sat under a warped tin roof. He had spent years sanding that metal and telling himself it was legacy, proof that some part of him had survived the work. In his mind, it was the one lever he still controlled. Then a child screamed from the north cabin. The sound cut straight through training and arguments. My legs decided before I did, and I ran toward it with heat at my back and breath burning thin. The cabin breathed smoke. Floorboards ticked with embers. I found a boy under the window, face black with soot, and pulled him out into air that felt like a punishment. Behind us, the shed folded with a soft roar. Sparks jumped like insects, and the ambulance was there 1 second and gone the next. The boy coughed against my chest, and I told myself the math was simple. My father stared at the wreckage the way people stare at a body that might still move. He said little, but his shoulders hardened into a line I knew. After the smoke came the numbers. Insurance rejected the claim, and the mounting debts from medical bills and quiet loans to Mark quickly led to financial strain. Responsibility slid into blame in inches. First careless. Then you chose a stranger over us, not shouted, just placed between us like a brick. After that, he stayed in the garage and I stayed anywhere else. I carried a small, quiet guilt that learned my routine and met me at the sink. I kept telling myself that day was not love or betrayal. It was triage. He began to call the ambulance our future, and I heard my failure in every syllable. I also knew the boy I carried out slept that night with a pulse and a mother at his side. The fire went out, the house stood, and the space between us cooled into something solid. That was the first crack. He fed it with pride and fear of becoming less. I fed it with silence that sounded a lot like regret, once the room went dark. The invitation came back unopened, edges cold from the mail truck, my name scarred by a black line of ink. The flap held tight, like a mouth choosing silence over explanation. I set it on the counter beside a chipped mug and a lemon going soft at the tip. A wet ring crept into the paper and I watched the stain spread the way a bruise decides its shape. Mrs. Dwyer called from 2 houses down with the careful voice people use for bad weather. She hinted at debt and at the kind of shame that makes men stare at their boots, then asked me to be kind if I could. I told myself their silence was a blanket, not a wall. Maybe they were keeping me warm from the draft of their trouble, not keeping me out. I pictured my father at the workbench, back curved over a stack of bills, the old radio whispering forecasts he could not change. I saw Mark and Luke nodding along, promising a break would find them if they stayed very still. But hurt hardens when you let it sit too long. Mine set around the idea that love retreats to stay pretty. And retreat looks a lot like abandonment when the lights are on. Pride does not only refuse help, pride studies locks, learns signatures, and starts to think a name can be collateral. I did not know the shape of it yet, only felt the draft under the door, and pressed a towel against the gap. What was coming was not a request or a confession, but a tidy plan that needed a villain with my face and a pen that moved like my father's on a bad day. Monday morning started with a thick envelope that did not bend. County letterhead, case number, my name paired with the word suspect. The accusation was simple on paper and heavy in the hand, misappropriating my mother's savings. I read it twice, then a third time, letting each date scrape past. My coffee went cold while the room held its breath. Anger stayed where I put it, under my sternum, steady and hot. The signature labeled as my father's sat at the bottom. It was too smooth, strokes that kept their nerve all the way through, nothing of his late wobble or the hitch he has after a long day. It looked like Mark's birthday cards, the same lazy loop on the K, and the way he drags the tail on T. My phone buzzed with a voicemail I had ignored at dawn. The voice slurred low and impatient, telling me to put the money back and quit pretending I was smarter than blood. Ice clinked against glass in the background, and a bar TV shouted a score. I pulled a legal pad and started a map, account numbers, dates, and the transfer list that came with the notice. A $900 hop sat in the middle, and the merchant code pointed to a tavern off Route 36, where Mark keeps a bar stool like a mailbox. I checked timestamps against my calendar. I was on call that night, logged into a flood model and eating from a vending machine that still takes quarters. The room seemed to pull tighter as if the vents had turned down, and the old clock on the stove got louder with each second. I tried on nicer explanations. Maybe a clerical mess, maybe someone chasing the wrong breadcrumb. The path refused to wobble, every crumb laid out in a straight line that felt less like discovery and more like staging. I printed the notice and took photos of the signature beside Mark's handwriting from an old card. I saved the voicemail to 2 drives and wrote the bar's address in the margin. I added a note to request camera footage and a copy of the bank's authorization trail. This was not a question tossed into the air to see what fell. It was a net pulled tight around one name. The family Cold War had found new rules and a referee, and the first whistle said I was the thief they needed me to be, unless I could prove the map was drawn by the hand that signed it. My father arrived with 2 officers while the kettle clicked itself off. Snow freckles clung to his coat, and he held himself like a man walking into a station to file a report, not a house where his daughter keeps extra mugs. One officer set a tablet on the counter, and a backyard video bloomed into gray. The footage was grainy, a hooded figure moving along the fence line, timestamp neat and tidy, the same night the money went missing. I felt my ribs tighten. Then I reached for what I knew. I opened my Army duty portal and pulled the GPS log that fixes me at a flood staging site more than 100 miles away. They studied the screen, and the room grew small. I kept my voice level and slid the printed route sheet across the counter. Time circled, coordinates highlighted, fuel receipts clipped behind. The second officer nodded without looking up, lips moving as he matched numbers. Then came the detail that matters, when everything else blurs. They mentioned shoe prints in the yard, size 11.5, clear enough to measure off the heel. I said I wear a women's 8, and let the words sit. No one moved. The tablet kept looping the same shadow against the fence, the same timestamp pretending to be truth. I added one more line, that Mark wears an 11.5, and I left it there like a pin on a map. The officers kept watching the video. My father kept watching me. I stayed with the paperwork and the math, calm as a metronome, and let the implication find its own breath. The officers asked how the video was pulled. My father stalled, then said Mark sent him the clip. The room shifted a degree cooler. A tech connected the tablet and ran a quick check. The timestamp did not match the file's internal clock. The video had traveled through 3 devices, and the last registered owner was Mark Bennett. I kept my hands flat on the counter and watched the footage one more time. The hooded figure wore a ribbed beanie with a thin white tag near the seam. That tag sits on the hats, sold at the little shop beside Mark's regular bar. No one needed me to underline it. The tech marked the chain of custody for formal review and asked for access to the original camera system. My father looked past me toward the window, as if fresh air could change metadata. I said I would provide whatever they needed and wrote the shop's name on my notepad for my own list. The video kept looping, the same shadow crossing the same fence, while the numbers around it stopped pretending. I felt a small, clean click inside. Not victory, just something aligning in place. The email hit before coffee, and took the oxygen with it. Access suspended pending review. Clearance is not a ribbon you pin on your chest. It is the anchor that keeps the work from sliding out from under you. Attached sat an anonymous complaint with a supporting letter that tried too hard to look official. The pen carved a trench on the Y and tied a strange loop on L. Luke writes like that when he wants to seem careful, pressing so hard the second page ghosts the first. I stood in the supply closet and let the hum of the vent settle my pulse. Losing clearance felt like someone had taken the roof off in January. Cold finds every seam, but cold also wakes you up. I walked back to my desk and changed posture from defense to measured fire. Archive every message to 2 places. Request front desk, call logs, legal consult, and the complaint in native format. Pull Luke's handwriting from birthday cards. Preserve chain of custody. Map dates against duty logs. I kept my voice even, and my hands busy. Bruised is not broken. If the ground shifts, you plant new footing and make the next move count. The house met me with the same tired smell it had after the fire. A mix of wet ash and old varnish. The front door stuck on the threshold and then let go. A small surrender that felt too familiar. I closed it behind me and listened to the quiet settle like dust. The kitchen had not learned new tricks. The low cabinet near the floor still gave its thin cack when I pulled it open. Behind a drift of bills and a rubber band that had died in place, my hand found a small leather notebook gone soft at the corners. The pages carried my mother's neat patience, every line alone to mark with dates and amounts, and the kind of hopeful math people do when they want tomorrow to behave. Near the back, she wrote one line in smaller letters asking to keep me in the dark. It landed in my chest with the soft weight of a stone in a pocket. Out on the porch, Mr. Peterson from across the street shuffled over and mentioned a woman coming and going all winter, then staying long enough to learn the porch light. I saw the shape in my head, the hood from the video, the easy path across the yard. The pattern did not argue anymore. I put the ledger in a zip bag and took photos of the cabinet and the stack of bills where it had been hiding. The house felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to read over my shoulder. Grief sat beside a clean line of clarity, and for once they did not fight for space. Fluorescent light flattened the county room into paper. I stood with my hands steady on a folder while the panel sifted through exhibits like they were counting grains of sand. The air conditioner hummed a thin, indifferent note. They began with the GPS logs. My duty trace drew a clean line across the map, time-stamped and dull as paperwork, placing me more than 100 miles from the backyard in question. Pages turned, pens clicked, and no one needed my voice. A technical analyst wheeled in a monitor and brought up the backyard clip. Metadata filled the screen in small, unsentimental rows. The internal clock disagreed with the visible timestamp, and the file's travels showed 3 devices in sequence, the last registered to Mark Bennett. No one reacted big. The chair asked 2 clarifying questions, and the analyst answered in the same temperature. Chain of custody noted. Time offset quantified. Origin device identified. It felt like listening to an altimeter read out loud, while the ground stays exactly where it should. I watched my father's posture shrink, a half-inch. The way a roofline sags after a hard winter. A clerk slid my GPS packet back across the table, and I placed it on top of my fuel receipts. The edges squared. My breath stayed even. Silence spread. Not dramatic, just decisive. Papers settled. Someone capped a pen. The panelists exchanged the kind of looks people reserve for conclusions that have already landed. I kept my eyes on the monitor until the last frame faded to black. This is how truth arrives sometimes, without speeches or thunder. Numbers line up. Timestamps stop arguing. A room exhales. I felt the verdict before I heard it. A small internal click as the story they built fell through its own floor and left me standing on solid ground. She entered with her shoulders squared, like someone walking into bad weather. I recognized her from photos on Mark's phone. The girl with the quick smile that never reached her eyes. She spoke into the quiet and laid out the bones of it. The old key, the night walk across the yard, the promise that some debt would vanish if she played the part. The panel asked calm questions, and she answered with the same small voice. Dates, times, who called first, who handed her the hoodie, how long she waited by the fence before the camera light winked. Each detail landed like a pin on a map until the route had no turns left to take. I stood very still and let the floor hold me. My father seemed to fold into his jacket as if there were less of him to keep upright. Mark stared at the tabletop and found nothing there to help, while Luke rubbed at a mark on the bench that never came off. The room did not change. Only the story inside it did. The chair thanked the witness and noted the record. Pens clicked. Pages closed. I kept my hands flat and my face quiet, and let procedure do what pride could not. I faced them and let the room get still. My father's shoulders had a tilt I had not seen before. Mark stared hard at the floor and Luke worked his thumb along a loose thread like he could pull a different ending out of it. I said I never took anything from my family. I only took back my life. The words landed and stayed where I put them. I gathered my folder, closed it with one hand, and turned toward the door. I did not wait for answers because answers are only edits to a story that already happened. The hallway smelled like paper and cold air, and the lights hummed in a steady line. My steps found a clean rhythm. The door closed behind me with an ordinary click that felt like a verdict. Outside, the afternoon looked plain and honest, and for the first time in months, so did I. Spring reached Colorado in small, honest ways. Snow pulled back from the ditches and let crocus blades try their luck. The air lost its bite, and I could finally breathe past my collarbone. Lydia called and asked me to walk her down the aisle. She is one of my trainees, tough as paracord. A kid who learned logistics before she learned to drive. I said yes, and felt the answer settle. Like good weight. The church was warm and full of faces that had done sandbag shifts with us when the river ran high. The news cycles in the lobby screens talked about another busy fire season and funding fights in D.C., the kind that turned disaster relief into a chessboard. I kept my focus on the aisle and the girl whose hands were shaking for all the right reasons. When the doors opened, she threaded her arm through mine and leaned in close. She whispered, "Thank you for showing up," and it moved through me like a clean current. That line gave back a piece of my own wedding day that I thought was permanently missing. The wedding was postponed indefinitely. Harper didn't argue. That evening, he sat beside me on the counter, helping me organize the legal papers. His silence a better anchor than any vow. He understood logistics. He knew the ground had shifted, and we had to plant new footing before building a roof. Our relationship was not the casualty. The lie was. But standing with Lydia, I realized the promise of us was still solid, built on the clarity I had fought for. After the ceremony, I stood on the steps and watched the sun push gold across the foothills. A breeze lifted the veil and carried the smell of lilac, and somewhere, a car radio mentioned new grants for wildfire mitigation and better mental health support for service members. It felt like the country and I were both trying to choose repair over noise. I do not want revenge. I want quiet edges and clear rules. Family is not a pass, it is a promise. Peace is not dramatic, it is showing up, filing what you need to file, and stepping away when the math no longer loves you back. I went home and slept through the night. I want to hear from you. If you have faced a family line that kept moving, or a silence that felt like a verdict, tell me how you set your boundaries and what it cost. Your story might be the map someone else needs tonight. Here is the operational debrief of what helped me. Write things down, keep copies, and seek legal clarity. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity.